Would you know it if your partner had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? More than likely you would, because they would have had an experience, maybe even one you shared, and they would react, maybe nightmares, confusion, restlessness at night. Usually with therapy, which you probably would go with them, they would recover, especially in the case if you were had both served in the military and you were aware of it. You may have even gotten a diagnosis. Well, now we're finding more and more people with chronic PTSD. Chronic PTSD, or C-PTSD, is not diagnosed in the DSM-5. So in other words, we don't have a true disorder, but we know it exists, and we know it exists mostly in people who grew up or were surrounded by trauma. And the idea of why it's so important in relationships, not only is it important because it would cause like severe disruption in your life, and it would make loving this person quite unstable. You'd have a lot of ups and downs. But what's more important is because we can't give it an actual diagnosis, a lot of therapists are reluctant to call something chronic. It has to be like, it has to fit a criteria, like for years and years. But chronic can be something like, let's say you gave birth or you had a traumatic experience, and it was so traumatic that you just completely numbed it or dissociated from it. Little bits of it can keep coming back years later. And for me, that would qualify as a chronic condition. Where I see it mostly is in families who grew up with a lot of trauma, a lot of disruption, a lot of chaos. And when they go to find someone, a partner, or they're dating, which is why you may be listening to this video and watching it right now, is because they're drawn sometimes back to the trauma. In other words, the trauma, because they grew up in it, it feels so familiar. It's part of their childhood. You know, when you have childhood memories of the holidays or something, yours are probably good. Well, theirs always have mixed trauma with it. And because of that, they sometimes need to recreate that. And I think that's one reason why we see more C-PTSD during the holidays, is because if you think about it, when you're growing up and you're in a traumatic or a chaotic family, what usually happens is the holidays are an emotional time, emotionally charged, stress. And so we see more trauma during those times. Domestic centers can tell you that the abuse is always higher when it's a holiday or there's some big major stressors, even some football games. Like when you have the Super Bowl, you'll see an increase in CTPSD because that's laced with emotion and trauma. If you're in love with a person who suffers from this, I'm going to give you some indicators that I think will be very helpful for you. If you listen and watch these indicators, and you can start the discussion with your partner, therapy does work for this. If nothing else, if you just set up a plan where you saw your therapist once a month and got homework and were able to talk about it, it's the talking about it so that your partner understands that really helps mitigate the symptoms of it. So if you can think of being able to talk about it as a way out of it, then I think that's going to put you in a much better light for dealing with it, managing it, and being able to create a healthy relationship even though you have this. Okay, the first, they keep repeating the same relationship over and over. So if they grew up in a domestic type of violence, many times they'll start repeating exactly the verbiage their parents used to use. And if you're dating this person, it will come out in a way that almost seems surreal. Like, why are you saying this? Like, in our relationship, they'll start picking up patterns. And what's unfortunate is many times if you have CPTSD, then you will look for a partner that actually treats you the way that whoever traumatized you treated you in the past. It's all part of you getting awareness of that. If you meet somebody who is a good person and that you actually loves you, many times this person will bore you. So you'll have to recreate somehow that pattern of trauma so that you can still feel familiar or at home with this person. It sounds crazy, but when you look at it from their point of view, it's not at all crazy. It's them trying to connect in a way that they just were immersed in a very dysfunctional, sick situation. Secondly, many times people who have C-PTSD have an emotional avoidance. They don't want to be emotional. And so if you say something like, I just don't understand why I feel like you've got a big wall up between us, that wall is still a protection for them. They're afraid to get close to you because they're afraid if they get close to you, it won't work. The relationship will not work. You'll see something in them, or they don't trust you that you are a good person. So it takes so much longer to break down these wall barriers. But if you know the reason underneath, it's going to be much easier for you to just start taking one brick out at a time. Secondly, a total lack of trust. If you have somebody that suffers from CTPSD, then you're always going to have to be concerned about understanding more than concerned that they are not going to trust you easily. They are going to run you through all kinds of tests of trust. And this is mostly because they are trying to survive. When you have C-PTSD, you do not trust, because when you trust, you might lose your life. If you think of those thoughts coming back for the person you're dating now, you will understand more why you explaining everything, you following through with everything. Their suspicion about you is so important. And for you not to get impatient, or if you are impatient, talk about it with them and say, listen, I'm on your side. I'm not going to hurt you. And the more you can reassure them with that, with small steps, the more likely they're going to start taking down those bricks that separate themselves from you. And lastly, they may have a total relationship avoidance. Many times, these are those people you talk to online for hours and you really start having feeling for, and you are convinced you have something real, but yet they won't follow through on their end. It's because they're terrified. They're in a survival mode. And at this point, since you don't have a relationship, what's most common is that you're going to walk away from this person. And nobody would blame you. But at the same time, understand it is not about you. It is about the person that struggles with this disorder. If you struggle with this disorder, as we get nearer to the holiday time, I want you to know that it's very common if all these feelings come back to you in a force you've never felt before. Use this. Challenge yourself to make a different year in the next year. Challenge yourself to make that first step by getting a therapy appointment. You can work through this. You can learn to manage this, but you can't do either of those things unless you can see it and are brave enough to take that first step to deal with it.